In the 1990s, Jim Carrey was one of the most successful comedians working in Hollywood. You could compare his zany style or his multiple impressions with someone like Robin Williams, but Carrey was edgier, crazier, far more willing to take risks than Robin Williams was in the 90s. Also, like Williams, Carrey showed his dramatic acting talents with Man on the Moon and The Truman Show. Now, I'm not going to go into Carrey's career during the 2000s or the 2010s. For now, I just want to focus on the comedies that he did in the 90s, because I have a rather controversial opinion about them. Almost none of them really hold up for me. Now, don't get me wrong, they're filled with hilarious moments, but for one reason or another, most of them just didn't age well. Liar Liar has good moments, but I've just lost count of all the articles and think pieces which point to how much of an undeserving jerk Carrey's character is in that film, or how the story would never work in a post-9/11 world. And Ace Ventura is probably my second most favorite of his 90s comedies, and it has moments that still make me burst out laughing to this day. But the story has a rather outdated twist that would never fly in today's world, for good reasons. Now, of course, none of those reasons that I gave should get in the way of you enjoying these films, but it just proves that these comedies are stuck in their time, so to speak. There is one comedy in the 90s that he did, however, which continues to hold up, and even seems to have predicted a part of the future, oddly enough. And that film is The Cable Guy. Directed by Ben Stiller and starring Jim Carrey and Matthew Broderick, the film follows an ordinary schlub named Steven, attracting the attention of an eccentric cable repairman who calls himself Chip Douglas. Chip wedges his way into Steven's life, much to Steven's embarrassment. But as it continues, Steven starts to see a value in having Chip around, and even begins to enjoy his company. Of course, things take a turn from there, but I won't go into that part of the story in case you haven't seen it. I've heard that this was despised when it first came out, and I guess I understand why. Carrey had always been zany and borderline crazy in his films, but this was the first time where his insanity was brought to the forefront in a dark manner. He plays a genuinely creepy guy, and his actions in the film are often criminal, especially nowadays. But at the same time, it's still hilarious. Some of the funniest moments of Jim Carrey's entire career are in The Cable Guy, such as his karaoke of a Jefferson Airplane song or his antics at medieval times. Meanwhile, this is also one of Matthew Broderick's best movies, too. I've always thought that Broderick has been unfairly criticized as being a one-trick pony due to Ferris Bueller being so damn good, but him not being able to do anything else that compares. But the thing is, I don't think that's true. I think Broderick has some real diversity in his acting ability. I thought he was really good in Glory, and I love his voice acting in The Lion King and BoJack Horseman. Meanwhile, in The Cable Guy, he does a brilliant job playing an average Joe he's just astounded and bemused and terrified of this kooky cable guy. Broderick has some of the funniest moments in the film purely through his reactions to Carrey, including one reaction which remains to be my favorite moment of the whole film. In our modern age of dark comedies and comedy which frequently seeps into pathos, I think The Cable Guy would fit in really well. Carrey's character isn't just scary or funny, he's also sad and pitiful at several moments, and we get a really stark idea of how someone like him came to be. The film's story is also ahead of its time, with Chip gleefully describing a future where, and I quote, "Every American home will integrate their television, phone, and computer. You'll be able to visit the Louvre on one channel or watch female wrestling on another. You can do your shopping at home or play Mortal Kombat with a friend from Vietnam." And he was right. Just look at today. In another harbinger of things to come, the film's cast of Ben Stiller, Owen Wilson, Jack Black, as well as Judd Apatow being part of the crew, these guys would all later work together to form Hollywood's frat pack. along with other stars like Will Ferrell and Vince Vaughn, for better or worse. Of all Jim Carrey's biggest 90s comedies, it's The Cable Guy which holds up the most for me as both a funny film and a relevant film. And this was apparently the movie which would supposedly destroy his career. More than ever, looking back on The Cable Guy makes me realize just how ahead of its time the movie was. And it still makes me roar with laughter every time I see it.